I can't believe I just marked the 1-year anniversary of launching my own private practice. I was worried about the headaches of doing billing and documentation all on my own without any administrative support. But it turns out with Simple Practice, the paperwork is easier than I ever expected. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high-trust certified, and built specifically for therapists. One of my favorite features is how effortless it is to create super bills for my clients so they can get reimbursed quickly. Simple Practice helps me focus on what I love most, working with clients, by lightening up the business side of running my own practice. And if you're just starting out or growing your practice, they also have a credentialing service that helps you get paneled independently. It takes the total headache out of insurance enrollment, giving you full autonomy over your own contracts without any middleman platforms taking a cut. If you are ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is a great time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
People with type C personality, they really can't stomach the idea of letting anyone down. The idea of disappointing someone is their worst nightmare. They are pathologically nice. They are conflict avoidant to the extreme. They are hyper responsible for managing the emotions of everyone around them. They are, on the outside, really excessively pleasant, but on the inside, they are really totally disconnected from their emotions.
These roots of type C were developed by forces that were beyond your control. And I think that can go a long way to helping you understand yourself better and letting go of some of the shame and the judgment of yourself around why you are the way you are, once you really understand where this came from.
That was Corey Glied and Anna White on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Harold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and Why Don't You Understand Me?
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey, listeners, be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host discussion of today's interview. I'm excited to welcome 2 fantastic guests to the podcast today to talk about the type C personality. Let me start by introducing my guests. Dr. Corey Glied is a clinical psychologist based in New York City who specializes in helping adults manage anxiety disorders, including obsessive compulsive disorder and insomnia. Before starting her private practice, she spent many years as an assistant professor of psychology at several major New York City hospitals, including Montefiore Hospital, NYU Medical Center, and most recently, Mount Sinai Hospital. Dr. Glied uses evidence-based approaches such as CBT and ACT to help clients get unstuck and build healthier, more fulfilling lives. She provides training and supervision in ACT and has published research on anxiety, trauma, and HIV-related health, and has been invited to present her work at national conferences. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Glied leads corporate wellness workshops focused on managing stress, anxiety, and building healthier relationships. She lives in Manhattan with her husband, 2 sons, and their dog. As a working mom, she understands the challenges of balancing career, family, and everything in between. And she's the first to admit she doesn't have it all figured out. Welcome, Corey. It's great to see you.
Super excited to be here, Debbie.
Anna White is a former investments executive who spent 20 years working for a range of Wall Street firms in capital markets, private equity, equity research, and asset management. She experienced severe burnout at one point in her career, which led to a chronic illness that was difficult to diagnose, treat, and recover from. Type C traits were a significant contributor to her declining health. After leaving corporate life, she founded a specialty care package company, Rest and Heal, which focuses on supporting women who have suffered hardship and/or illness through carefully curated gift packages meant to soothe, educate, and re-energize the spirit. She holds a BS and MBA in Business Administration from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome, Anna. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's great to be here.
And together, these two have a podcast called The Type C Personality, a blog, and they are currently finishing up a book on Type C, which will be released in 2027. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be on the lookout for that book next year. And in the meantime, I'm really excited to talk to the two of you today. So I want to start with some definitions. I think a lot of people have probably heard about type A personalities and type B personalities, but let's quickly go over those.
Sure. Yes, you're right. Most people know about type A and type B, but most people don't know about type C. Type A people are known as being competitive and hard charging, kind of operating with a sense of urgency. There are great things about this personality. They can be goal-oriented strivers, get it done people, but it can also kind of tip into aggression or hostility or even controlling type behavior. And then type B, people are known as more relaxed and patient and flexible. They have maybe higher emotional stability and resilience. And then maybe, not as many downsides there, obviously, but maybe they can veer into being a little bit too laid back. And this can have some health repercussions if you're not taking your health seriously enough.
Okay. And then what about type C? This is kind of the newer one that you two specialize in. So how would you define the type C personality?
So I'm just going to define the type C personality, but we're also going to get into how it developed a little bit later on. So people with type C personality, you can think of them as overgivers. They really can't stomach the idea of letting anyone down. The idea of disappointing someone is their worst nightmare. They can't say no. They default to saying yes when someone asks for anything. They are pathologically nice. They are conflict avoidant to the extreme. They are hyper responsible for managing the emotions of everyone around them. They are on the outside really excessively pleasant, but on the inside, they are really totally disconnected from their emotions. Sadly, a lot of them suffer in silence. Often we will think of them as people pleasers. That's kind of a common term, but we just really feel this is super shallow. It's really kind of negative, and it definitely doesn't get into the complexity of all that really turns into the type C personality.
Okay. Thank you for setting the stage with that brief nutshell explanation. And as you said, we will really unpack that in a lot more depth. But I do want to make it personal and to give an example. Anna, you have talked very openly about your own story and written about it and talked about it on your podcast. And so can you tell us a little bit about your journey of discovering that you were type C and the signs along the way?
Sure. Yes. I would definitely say I am the poster child for the type C personality. And it really started from a young age. I fell into these patterns of just trying to placate other people. This was, the 1970s. I grew up in the South, in Tennessee and North Carolina. Kids were kind of expected to be seen and not heard. And punishments could be really, really, really severe. So you kind of kept your head down and you just didn't make any waves. And this really kind of became part of my persona. It was the way I operated. I wanted to be this easy, low maintenance person who just didn't ask much of anyone else. And this really, it defined my life. It became a really big problem for me. I would say it really started to show up a lot when I got into the work world. I worked in finance for a number of years. And I just had such a hard time with the idea of letting anybody down. My boss, my team members, coworkers. I would say yes to anything that people asked of me. I felt so guilty for saying no. And I worked crazy hours. I would, answer emails immediately. I was hyper available to anyone that needed me. I was overly responsible, took everything super, super seriously. Mistakes were just very, very hard for me to manage. And I was hell-bent on being the one you could count on, the one who is always going to make your life easier. So I think we all know how this story ends. It ends with burnout. you as a type C, you just give and give and give of yourself until there's nothing left.
Well, and to me, the part of your story that just really captured this and like makes me want to cry even thinking about it was your maternity leave story. Would you mind sharing that with us? I mean, I'm crying just thinking about it because I just
well, thank you for the sympathy. But I've told it so many times now that I'm kind of immune to it. But we definitely opened the book with it because it's a very, very type C story. And when I first told Corey this story, I thought, you're going to think I'm nuts with this story. But she was like, no, this is standard. This is pretty typical. So back in 2007, I had joined this new firm. It was a private equity firm. It was very small, 25 people, mostly men. I was 36 years old and I wanted a second baby. I had a toddler at home. So my husband and I, we started trying and we were very blessed. We got pregnant very quickly, easily. But the first thing that struck me was, of course, guilt. Now I'm going to have to go to my team and tell them that so soon after joining this firm, I'm going to go out on maternity leave and I'm not going to be available. So to ease my distress over this situation, I sat down with my bosses and I said, don't worry, I've done this before. If you need me after the baby's born, I'm happy to pitch in. Just call me. So yes, this was not my finest moment. And I was also not working for the most scrupulous people. So 36 hours after I gave birth, and I was still in the hospital, my female boss called me and said, hey, Anna, we've got this energy deal heating up. We've got to get these investor letters out. When are you available to get going on this? Okay, so because I'm type C and I'd made this crazy promise, my default response was, sure, no problem. I'm here for you. I'll be back home tomorrow. I'll get it going. And this ended up with me working straight through my maternity leave, which was only 7 weeks, by the way. Things are better now. This is 2007, and there are a lot more protections in place than there were back then. But it was madness. I mean, I was up all night. I was calling investors around the world. I was, nursing Emma on one side. I had the phone in the other hand. And by the time I went back to work, I was literally dragging myself to work, and I had done some serious damage to my body. I ended up with this chronic fatigue issue and a lot of other fun health problems. And it took a lot of years to sort of unwind it all and sort it out.
I mean, having given birth twice myself, I just remember how it feels. And you don't have two brain cells to rub together at that point. And so I'm just like shocked that they were not sensitive enough, but that you managed to do that is, sad, but also in its own way, quite impressive, actually. That's the flip side of it.
Yes. It was a situation where a lot of people that are type C feel this way. I just felt so powerless. I didn't feel like I had any platform to stand on to push back and say, I've made this promise and I need to rethink it. I just felt like duty bound to deliver on what I promised these people, regardless of who they were, regardless of, the way they were operating, and knowing that this was a really bad thing to be asking of me. That didn't even enter in for me. It was like, no, I've made this promise and now I've got to deliver.
And over time, how did this type C pattern impact you in terms of your health and also your career and your relationships? Like what happened down the road?
Well, I think just big picture, I kind of had to learn the hard way that being in poor health affects every single aspect of your life. If you're not taking good care of yourself, like I was not, you're going to end up in a dark place. And if you don't feel good on a physical level, then nothing in your life is going to work. It's going to impact everything, your career, your relationships, everything. And I just felt rotten all the time for several years. I was in a really dark place. I mean, sometimes I was like, I don't even want to wake up tomorrow. I feel that bad.
Thank you for sharing that, Anna. It's very relatable. And Corey, I'd like to turn it over to you. First of all, would you say that you're a type C personality too? Do you identify with any of this?
Well, it's so interesting that you say that because when Anna first told me about type C, because Anna was the first person that told me about type C. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I thought, oh, that's so interesting. It really describes a lot of my patients. But as we've become more aware, we've interviewed people, I've heard more of Anna's story, I realized, oh my gosh, there are definitely tendencies. I would not say that this is something that causes significant impairment in my life, but I definitely see tendencies at home with my kids and my husband. I very much can struggle to just land that no with my kids. And I undervalue my time with my husband. So it's just kind of been educational and helpful for me to think about. But from a patient perspective, it has been super helpful. I think that often when I would talk to patients, I would previously have thought of them as kind of people pleasers, right? There's such a negative connotation with that. I would write it in my notes, right, on the side of my paper. And there's really no origin story. So I think that ultimately when Anna started talking to me about this type C personality, it really helped me, first of all, understand more about myself, but really just bring a larger framework to my patients that I think has been really helpful. At the core of type C, there's this really extreme disconnect between one's emotions. And this leads to really a breakdown in internal and external communication. So I'm an ACT therapist, acceptance and commitment therapy. Obviously, this is, a huge part of the podcast. And I realized that by understanding more about type C, I could really bring a lot of ACT skills. They are perfect for ACT. In ACT, you work with people, and for type C, it's very similar. You really want to help people notice specific thoughts and behaviors. For type C, these are specific to type C. And there are specific types of thoughts and behaviors that keep them stuck, really from fully engaging in their life. Oftentimes, this is, stuck in avoidance or excessive doing or fixing, problem solving, constantly thinking about and doing things for other people. And then, as Anna was talking earlier, there's this need, we have to reconnect, right? So there's this disconnect with the body. So we definitely work on really connect back to your body. And what are the emotions you're having? Ultimately, this is the way that type C people can live more honestly with themselves and other people. A lot of times type C people will come to treatment and they are exhausted, just like Anna was talking about. They are not happy in their relationships. They're not happy with how they're living their lives, but they don't really know what to do differently. So there's a lot of work really just to bring a lot of choices and decisions that they're making in response to guilt, anxiety, anger. These are kind of like the big ones for type C. What are you doing when those show up, like avoidance or getting stuck in rumination or overthinking? So obviously, as an ACT therapist, I'm going to say, what else can you do, right? That's not working. So we really try to also connect to what are the things that matter to you, right? Because if you're going to be willing to make space for guilt and anxiety and anger, then you have to really connect to the things that matter to you in order to move forward. So most type C people don't even know what those are. What are my values? What are the things I want to prioritize? What are the things that matter most to me? So we spent time working on that and ultimately trying to connect to those things to help live a life that is more about the things that you care about and feels more engaged, not as avoidant and more for other people.
I love that. And thinking about my own practice, this is a really helpful way to think about it. And there are so many different ways that this shows up clinically. So that's super helpful, both as a person and as a therapist. Can you tell us the story about how you came across the idea of type C and came together to collaborate on this work?
Yeah, I'll start there. So, I was in this dark place, feeling horribly, struggling with chronic fatigue, along with other issues. I had chronic sinus infections. I was losing weight. I had all this brain fog, cognitive problems. My sleep was disrupted. And it took a while, which is kind of crazy, but it took me a while to kind of start taking my health a little more seriously. And I started to go down the traditional medicine path. And I saw a lot of different types of doctors and specialists, and all the tests were coming back like, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You're totally fine, which was frustrating, obviously, because I'm not fine, barely functioning. But when you don't get answers from the traditional medicine world, you kind of start to explore other avenues. And I started just really opening up to different ideas around how I could help myself. And so, that was seeing a functional medicine doctor. I saw a psychologist. I started alternative treatments. I really went deep into nutrition to see if I could kind of fix what was happening at the cellular level. And I just started reading so many self-help books, both psychological and spiritual, and they made such a difference in my life. And during the course of this, I chanced upon this book. It's a book by Dr. Nasha Winters called The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. And I didn't have cancer, but I was really, really interested in her deep nutrition approach to healing chronic illnesses. I had had a lot of success with changing my diet and just trying to get healthier, cutting out some bad habits of mine. And Dr. Winters, she has a lot of success with really difficult cases. So I read this very, very, very dense book, which is heavily researched. And in the tiny corner of the book, there's this description of the type C personality. And it was one of those moments where I was like, wait a minute, what? If there's anything that encapsulates me, this is it. And I got chills. I just felt like, oh my gosh, wait, more people need to know about this. They really do. And at this point in my life, I was on a little bit different path. I was feeling a little bit better. I had left the corporate world. I was transitioning into becoming an entrepreneur and running this, Rest and Heal, the wellness themed gift business. And as part of that, I started to host some wellness type content for customers. And Corey was kind enough to be a part of that. We had met each other. Our kids were in kindergarten together. And so we did a couple sessions on feeling overwhelmed and guilt, but we discovered that we really liked working together and thought, okay, what else can we work on together? And so we were having dinner one night on the Upper West Side, and I brought up this idea of type C, like, Carrie, I've never heard of this. Have you ever heard of this? And
I'll take it from there.
yeah.
So Anna and I, we were good friends, but we also luckily liked to work together, and that was really fun. And Anna talked to me about this type C personality. She came to me saying, I'm sure you've heard about this. We got to do something about this. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never heard of this before. And Anna was flabbergasted. But once she slowed down and explained it to me, I realized, oh my gosh, this explains so many of my clients. I think this is something really important. Again, it gets away from sort of the negative connotation. There's a lot of shame and blame that people have when they are really struggling and they're so focused on other people. And so the two of us just really decided, let's do something around this. We didn't exactly know what we were going to do or where it was going to go, but we liked working together. And I think we were both kind of energized. And so that's where it took off.
I love how you have the mom and friendship connection that led to this beautiful collaboration. So cool. Yeah. So I want to dive into some specific topics related to the type C personality. And there's so much to talk about there, but I kind of came up with a few that I thought might be especially interesting to our listeners. So can we start with the idea of the rigid thinking patterns and sort of the rules and rule govern behavior aspect of this a little bit more?
So this is the part that I actually think really helps people not feel so alone and kind of let go of some of that blame and shame, because part of understanding the type C personality is actually understanding the development. So people with type C traits often were growing up in childhoods where certain types of experiences they were having that really led them to believe that their feelings and needs were just not as important as others, and that they were a burden to other people. So as a result, children or people that were in these environments learn to just squash their emotions, keep them to themselves, not share them. So people with type C traits, they report sometimes these experiences were abuse or significant emotional neglect or excessive criticism or perfectionism from parents or caregivers. And really as a survival strategy, they develop these very rigid mental rules to help them feel safer. So these roles basically take over and they guide behaviors, moving them forward in their life. And we learn through our investigations, our interviews for the book, and obviously through Anna's story and my patients, that the roles create a lot of problems, both for relationships and physical health. So I just wanted to give a couple examples of the roles. So here are some common type C roles that drive behaviors. If I'm upset, I should keep it to myself so I don't burden anyone else. If I keep everyone happy, no one will get angry with me. I should never put myself before the team. Everyone around me has a lot to do. I should always try to take on another task rather than burden them. My needs don't matter as much as those of my family, friends, coworkers, or superiors.
Some of those are so culturally embedded, aren't they? We can just absorb those. And you can see how you just latch onto those roles and have a really hard time loosening up on them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, we talk about this in our book that they develop, with a caregiving situation or other situations, and then they're just solidified by the cultural and societal expectations. And a lot of, different cultures are really hammering these rules home for people.
Yeah, I think there's also rewards, right? There can be promotions, praise, all those things that reinforce them.
Absolutely.
A big thank you to our sponsor, Vinted. Vinted is saving my closet, and it can save yours too. I have been so tired of my old clothes, keeping them around, thinking I'll wear them at some point, but of course never do. Thanks to Vinted, a secondhand marketplace app, I can list the clothes I no longer want and make space for a fresh new look. Listing my clothes on Vinted means less waste and making some extra cash. Plus, there are no seller fees, so you keep everything you earn. The app is free to download, and Vinted makes the sign-up and listing process super, super easy. They even provide a prepaid shipping label. Vinted is on a mission to make secondhand your first choice, giving quality items a second life again and again. Whether you're clearing out pieces you no longer wear or finding unique items at great prices, Vinted makes it simple to refresh your wardrobe, earn extra cash, and give your clothes that second life. So if you're ready to clean out your closet and make some extra money, download the Vinted app for free today and start listing. With no seller fees, you keep every dollar you earn.
Who else feels like August is the Sunday of summer? It's the perfect time to hit reset before the autumn rush, and for me, that always starts with my wardrobe. Quince proves you don't need a crowded closet to look incredible, you just need the right pieces. Quince specializes in effortless, high-quality essentials like ultra-soft organic cotton and premium Mongolian cashmere sweaters. They're beautifully tailored, built to last, and transition seamlessly from morning meetings to dinner. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality, not brand markup. I have several pieces from Quince, including my aviator glasses, a bohemian skirt, and a woven purse that I reach for over and over again. And it's not just apparel. Quince also brings that same everyday elevation to everything they offer, from hotel quality bedding and bath to kitchen staples, essentials, and thoughtfully designed furniture. Upgrade your everyday. Download the Quince app for app-exclusive offers or go to quince.com/POTC. Get free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada and the UK too. That's QUINCE.com/POTC.
Now, what about guilt? Let's talk about guilt.
I think what is so interesting about guilt and type C is that when we violate any of these rules, guilt is massive for us. So in a way, we're just driven by guilt, and we're saying yes to people just to avoid feeling guilty. And this showed up for me so much in my life. If someone asked me to do something, yes, I'm going to give you a big fat yes, because to say no would mean that I've gone against that rule of I can't disappoint you. I can't let you down. And when you're in the workplace, this can become a huge problem because you're not going to take care of yourself. I was racked with guilt all the time. Anytime I took vacation or left early for the day, I just felt so guilty. So I didn't do those things, or I kept them to a minimum. And then, you've got a self-care problem on your hands. You're not taking time off. You're not taking the time that you need to take care of yourself.
And I know you've mentioned a couple times that one of the hallmarks of type C is really prioritizing other people's needs, often at the expense of your own, as you just mentioned. So is there anything else you want to add about that component of type C?
I would just say that is a main driver. You are not seeing yourself on equal footing with other people. So you are always prioritizing everyone else's needs above your own. And like Corey said, in childhood, you somehow got the message that your needs weren't that important. So you learned to just put them at the bottom of the list or just ignore them altogether. It just became this internal thing. And I think a lot of type C people like me, you just don't even realize that you have needs. You're like, what do you mean needs? I don't have needs. I'm low maintenance. I don't need anything from you. And this really came through loud and clear in the interviews that we did from the book. It was so interesting to hear people talk about this. There was one lovely gentleman who was talking about how his children, whenever they needed something, he was on it. He would just jump on it. If it was ice cream at 11 o'clock at night, he was getting in the car and going to get it for them. And then other people talked about how they were never able to state a preference. They would just go along with the crowd. One woman talked about how if her girlfriends were organizing a dinner and they were talking about when they could do it, people were saying, I can't do this date. I can't do this date. I can't do this date. And she was the one kind of rearranging herself to figure out how to make the date that works for everyone else work for her. Right. And then another woman was talking about how she was a younger woman in college. She was staying up late at night to create these study guides for her team because she wanted to provide that for them. Her need for sleep didn't matter as much as their need for the study guides. And it can get a lot darker than just those examples. We talked to people who were engaging in sex that they didn't want to engage in, people that were staying in abusive relationships because they were so focused on that person's needs and not prioritizing themselves. So I think this is just something that can really play out in the lives of type C people and get people to a really dark place if it gets to the extreme.
I just read Fame Sick, Lena Dunham's memoir. Have either of you? It's very popular these days. I don't know if you've read it yet. And I don't know if she would be type C. She might have a little type A in her. I'm not sure. But she talks about how she would just exhaust herself, like answering every email, doing favors for people, like doing everything demanded of her. And when you're in that type of role, celebrity, and she just really couldn't say no, and then ended up just getting so worn down, just not prioritizing herself to the point where she'd be in the hospital bed trying to run the show,
I think we need to talk to Lena Dunham, Corey.
I think so. Get it. See if we can catch up for your book.
Yeah.
Now, what about the impact on people's relationships? Like, how does this usually play out over time for people?
Okay, so this is obviously not a surprise. It's going to have a huge impact on relationships. So people with type C personality, they're on automatic pilot. I cannot disappoint. I can't burn anyone. I can't upset people. I can't say no. And so obviously that's going to influence, right, how you see yourself and how you interact with other people. It influences how you engage with your family, your friends, intimate partners, kids, obviously coworkers. And a lot of times, frankly, relationships end up being really lopsided, really unbalanced, also really inauthentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not honest, right? Because a type C person can't share how they're really feeling. So sometimes actually that really affects people and that people walk away from type C people because it doesn't feel genuine. Type C people often get really stuck in doing a lot for others. So, obviously you can see this playing out with people who are really needy, or people who ask a lot for things, maybe aggressive or self-involved. We call them takers. Type C would be givers. Oftentimes this can be people who are narcissistic. There's this kind of, like, I think of, electrons, right? Certain people get attracted to a type C, and type Cs attract certain types of people. So there is this, it's great to have someone who does so much for you and tries to think about every single need you have. Some people really love that, but obviously it's not great for ultimately the quality of the relationship. And this emotional disconnect and these communication issues are really sort of at the foundation of the relationship issues. So the other thing I want to say is that it can be really problematic in situations of balances of power, right? So when in work environments, in medical settings, all those type C roles can really have just a real significant cost for the type C. So again, maybe missing promotions, not getting the credit they deserve, and being taken advantage of. Maybe a doctor doesn't listen to you. So all of this has a huge toll on your mental and physical well-being.
Right. Just when you need to advocate for yourself in some situations with a power imbalance, it might be really hard to do that. Yeah. And could you say more about the part about being sort of drawn to difficult people or people who might take advantage of that, like the narcissistic types or the, kind of gaslighting types? Like how does that play out?
I wouldn't use the word drawn to. I would say type C people attract.
Okay.
And I would say people who are this category we're talking about are attracted to a type C person. But one of the things I think that we can all see, if you're a therapist or someone who's familiar with trauma, is that you tend to go towards the familiar. So red flags are not obvious to you. If you grew up in an environment where you were around abuse, you were neglected, there was so much going on, you didn't want to be a burden, your parents were overwhelmed. There's this thing that happens where you're just used to that environment. So when you are around someone else who's similar, it just feels familiar. And as we talked about type C, I was going to say all those sort of red flags that someone else might experience, a type C person doesn't. And as we talked about, there's this emotional disconnect. So your gut might be saying, run away. And you are just not listening to that. You're just like, shh, you're just completely disconnected.
Do the type C traits tend to happen more in the workplace? We've talked about some workplace examples, or at home, or both. Like, is there one particular domain where this might be likely to occur?
I personally had a harder time at work than at home. I think we learned through our book interviews that it kind of varies by the person. But for me personally, growing up with some degree of financial insecurity, the stakes always felt really high at work. Like, I can't let the boss down. I've got to make sure she's happy for my own survival. But people certainly talked a lot about not wanting to disappoint their spouses or their kids, about taking on way too much, which obviously can exacerbate division of labor issues in a partnership, which a lot of people struggle with. So that can be a big problem for type C. But in the workplace, for me, the way it manifested is, and I think for a lot of people, it just can really hold you back. It's harder to advance because you're taking on things that you probably shouldn't be taking on. You're taking on things that nobody else wants to do. So it might be things that are below your skill level, or they're not providing learning opportunities for you, but you're taking it on because you don't want to disappoint someone else. So you might be stoling out at your skills because of that. I was lucky later in my career to have people that were really pushing me and helping me advance certain areas, which was wonderful. And I needed that push. It's also really hard for type C people to delegate or ask for help in any way, because you've got these rules about not burdening other people. So you don't want to delegate to anyone. You don't want to add to their burden. And I have a classic story about this where one of my deliverables in corporate lingo was to write this financial markets report that was due every Monday morning. And I was at a fairly senior level by this point, but I had a really hard time letting that report go. It had to be written over the weekend. And that was a burden for people. And I didn't want to burden anybody else with that. But I had 2 young kids, right? So, but I still took it on. And it was just really hard for me to delegate that work out. And there were other elements involved. I could be a bit of a perfectionist, and I don't like delivering feedback to people. And that's another thing that can really hold type C people back. But I burdened myself in a huge way by having this report that I had to write every single weekend. So I think in the workplace, it can be a real, real problem. And if there's really bad behavior in the workplace, like abusive or harassment type behavior, the type C person is going to be the first person to let that slide. I don't want to burden anyone. I'm easy. That'll just go away, And it was funny because we were talking to a hedge fund manager at one point, and he was like, "Oh, I love type C people. They're great. They'll do whatever you ask them to do. They're on it, So you can do well in the workplace because of all these qualities, but then you're also held back in other ways. But I think ultimately, bigger picture, the biggest risk is just burning yourself out. We had somebody on in our book interview process who talked about how he would just leave a job every 2 or 3 years. No one had any idea that he was suffering and that he was not thriving in the workplace. Everybody thought he was just fine because he had on the pleasant mask. All's fine here. Look away. But then he would get to the point where he just would leave, and people were kind of dumbfounded and blindsided, like, wait a minute, what are you doing? But that was a pattern. Every 2 or 3 years, he would leave a job. So, I think that's something that employers kind of have to be aware of. It's one thing that Corey and I really want to do with this book is kind of help educate people in the corporate world about what this personality type is all about, because you're not going to see it. You can't really see it. Everyone's happy and smiling. Everything's great. But underneath it, no, things are not great.
You're right. Like, it kind of looks good on the surface. It looks really good on the surface, actually. And yet it's not as good as it looks.
Sleep Number's new collections are designed to adapt to the changing nature of your life and your sleep needs. Whether it's the personalized comfort of the Comfort Mode mattress, the targeted pressure relief of the Comfort Next mattress, or the Climate Collection that actively cools or warms to help you fall asleep and stay asleep.
And now, all beds are on sale during our biggest sale of the year. Save 25% on the new Comfort Next Luxe, plus free delivery on any mattress. Ends Monday, only at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com.
And then just to kind of touch on one area and the other, the home domain, the life outside of work, I am curious about challenges with parenting, because you mentioned a couple times type C parents might have a hard time. So, what are particular challenges for parents if they happen to be a type C person?
I see this a lot in clients where I'll have a parent or even the couple, and they're managing a child, or often an adult child with a lot of mental health issues. And it's so hard for the parents to see how their struggles of not being able to say no, constantly diving in, are actually making them suffer and not helping the child grow. Right. And so, I think this is really helpful for many parents, but a type C parent is always trying to fix things, is always doing everything for the kid, never wants them to struggle. Often, they've got a lot of homework to do. Okay, I'll do all the chores around the house, right? But that's in a mild way. But ultimately, it's really not being able to sit with and realize, no, I have to realize that the more I help them, the less they are going to get to be resilient, an adult. And so they have to work on managing all those guilty feelings that they feel when the kid comes and asks for things because the child themselves is struggling. And this is a huge component of this tolerating really painful emotions. Those type C rules, they show up and they're screaming at you, and you have to work to go in a different direction, which is so hard.
I was just thinking, one of our co-hosts, Annalie Edlin, has a book, Autonomy, Supportive Parenting. And for parents who are struggling with this, that would be a great book, because it's all about helping the kids be more autonomous, which does require the parents to step back, at a developmentally appropriate degree. And that can be really difficult. Sometimes it's like, it's just easier to do it yourself, or you want to be nurturing. But yeah, to get them to where they're capable and autonomous, you really do need to work on that. That's kind of something the parents themselves need to foster. So thank you for that, deep dive into some of these areas of type C. Can you tell us, is this backed up by research? What does the research have to say about type C?
Well, it's interesting. The type C personality first surfaced in the medical research back in the late 70s, early 80s. And a woman named Dr. Lydia Timashok was the real research pioneer behind type C. She studied these behaviors and patterns in melanoma and AIDS patients. And her subjects were extreme pleasers. They were out to please everyone, not only the people they cared about, but also authority figures and strangers. And they were very disconnected. They never expressed anger, rarely expressed fear or sadness. And what she found was that this coping style created extra stress on the body. Now, she was at this point studying it in the context of cancer. And so what she found was that type C can weaken the immune system and make it more vulnerable to the progression of cancer. She didn't find that being type C causes cancer, but she did find that type C might put you more at risk. Obviously, there are a lot of risk factors for cancer, but she found that type C was a risk factor. You might be less able to fight it off. And she wrote a very detailed book about it in 1992. It's now out of print, but it's very, very compelling. And after that, more people went on to study type C, and the findings were kind of they were more mixed. It can be kind of a hard thing to pinpoint because we're all complicated people and these traits can exist on a spectrum. And type C are often so disconnected about how we're feeling that we're not always the most reliable narrators when it comes to answering surveys. So most recently, and interestingly, some researchers out of Poland worked to create a more refined definition of type C. They wanted to kind of standardize the measurement of it. So that research is ongoing. And while this is all very interesting, we just think it's so interesting to think of type C as this framework for people to see themselves differently. And if you do see this list of type C traits and you see this list of rules that you're operating by, to know that, okay, I'm fitting this profile, right? And there are health ramifications to living this way. You're not going to take good care of yourself. You're going to be under extra stress. Your relationships are not going to be thriving. You're probably going to get yourself into a really dark place. And our message is there's a lot you can do about it. There's a lot that you can do about it.
Well, awareness is the first step. And so you're doing your part here, the first step toward change. And so you're helping to make people aware of this. And that's the perfect note actually to transition into talking a little bit about some of the things you provide people strategies to help type C personalities learn to, have a healthier relationship with this stuff. And so there's so much to talk about here. And I do want to say, for a deeper dive, definitely check out your podcast. You have a blog that covers so many things. You have the book coming out next year. So, pre-order that ASAP. But I did want to spend the rest of our time talking just about a couple of examples of some of the strategies you would recommend for a type C person like Anna to get to a better place. And I don't know if maybe the two of you want to just talk about a couple of your favorite strategies.
So as Anna was saying, the good news is you can learn new ways to communicate, to respond, to understand what matters to you, and to even figure out what are your needs. So we created a framework that really centers on 4 key areas and put the skills in those areas. So the tools that we came up with are spot the roles in our minds, accept our importance, sit with difficult emotions, and say no thoughtfully. So that actually comes out to the acronym SASS. So we hope that the SASS skills will help people really prevent burnout, navigate tough spots in their career, in relationships, and ultimately help them take better care of ourselves. So let's just go over these quickly. The spot the roles is the first area. And this is really about what are those roles, about not disappointing people, burdening people, upsetting others, and really trying to be honest with yourself about the cost. So in ACT and in many therapies, particularly CBT, there's this understanding that thoughts really have a huge impact on decisions, actions, and also our bodies. So we got to notice those first. That's the key. Bring those into your awareness. They can give you the tools to then understand and look at things more accurately and maybe make some different choices. So that would be spot the roles. Accept your importance. So hard. I think maybe this is the area that my patients struggle the most with. But people who grew up in these really invalidating, traumatic childhoods just really struggle with this belief, like my needs are less important than others. And this is so deeply embedded. So it's very hard. But when this is part of who you are, it leads to this emotional burnout. And, when you're at the bottom, and all of these does a problem. So we talk about in our podcast and our website and in the book, really working on self-compassion, just recognizing we are all human. Just because you don't believe it doesn't make it true, right? We are all on equal footing. We all have flaws. We all matter. We all have needs. And also just bringing this awareness to self-criticism. So recognizing that a lot of people with type C really struggle with beating themselves up, and that does not get you anywhere.
I just want to add there that I think a big part of accepting your importance, like the understanding that these roots of type C were developed by forces that were beyond your control. And I think that can go a long way to helping you understand yourself better and letting go of some of the shame and the judgment of yourself around why you are the way you are. So I think that's a key point that can really help you see yourself on more equal footing with other people once you really understand where this came from.
And I think that that's actually just a huge component of the label itself, like just understanding this is an actual thing, this is how it develops, really just helps people not feel so alone, recognize they were not in control of these coping styles happening, but there are so many things that you can do differently now. The third area, sit with and tolerate painful emotions. Now, we are definitely not saying put up with abuse of any kind, but it's really about reconnecting with your body. Type Cs, many people live a lot in their heads. Type Cs are right up there. They are not in their bodies. So we have a lot of strategies in the book about really working on reconnecting to your body, the body scan, 5 senses, exercises, things like that. And also, how do you manage when guilt shows up? How do you manage when anxiety shows up and anger shows up? These are painful emotions. No one wants to feel these emotions. Type Cs are not the only people that way. So we have a lot of exercises that we talk about. Journaling to manage painful emotions, also really recognizing maybe you're stuck in thinking or trying to figure out something or control something that you don't really actually have the control over. So really getting your thoughts out onto paper and getting a better perspective from them can really help. And then we also have some ways to manage physical urges, like, the urge to fix, the urge to do something. The urge surfing exercise really helps with noticing and helping your body manage those really powerful urges that show up. And last but not least, the say no thoughtfully. This is really hard for Type Cs. So there's this default to yes. We have a lot of strategies that we talk about learning to say no. Type C has never had the language. So the first thing we actually do is just, here's what you can say, right? That is not something that, many of you out there might not realize, but that isn't gone. That is not a skill that you have. Another great strategy that we talk about is the delay tactic, which is just basically saying, can I get back to you on that? Some people at Type C, just don't even realize that that's an opportunity to say that. And obviously, as we talked about earlier, there's this huge attraction to people who are pushy, emotionally manipulative, won't take no for an answer. And we actually go through strategies in the book, as well as on our website and blog about what can you do in those situations, giving Type C people the tools that they never learned.
I would just love to add that on the topic of the delay tactic, this is one where when I look back at that maternity leave story that I told at the beginning, if I had simply said to the boss, I need to come back to you tomorrow, I need some time to think about what I'm going to be able to deliver over the next few weeks, and had the time to just really think about it, talk to my husband about it, and make a decision that was in my best interest, I could still have honored that promise in some way, but maybe it was a much, much, much smaller way and one that didn't wreck my health for years. And I think what's so helpful to me as a Type C person is having these very practical strategies. They're not really pie in the sky ideas. They're sort of like, no, here is the script that you can use. That's what I needed. I didn't know how to say no to people. Even though I could see other people around me saying no to people, I couldn't do it. So I think having that level of instruction for a Type C person is just so valuable.
Well, that was an incredible overview of the strategies. And again, if this resonates for you, just pull up Type C and take a look at the amazing content you have out there. Be on the lookout for the book. But just that orientation, that SASS framework, that gives everyone a glimpse, I think, of what to work on. So good luck to all the Type Cs out there with this. And we have faith that you can get to a better place. To end, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about your project and about where people can find your work online? Of course, we'll link to everything on our show notes today. But yeah, tell us a little bit about where the work stands and where people can find you.
Well, to be honest, I will say we have put a lot of time and energy lately into the book. So we know it's far out, but May 2027, please run out and buy that book. But Almost everything that's in the book is on our website, thetypecpersonality.com. And we've had some amazing guests on our podcast, including a lovely woman named Debbie Sorensen, who talks all about burnout, which we understand because we've been talking about a lot too. We've had some terrific guests, but ultimately, our goals really are education and awareness. We do not want people suffering in silence. We do not want people to feel alone or stay stuck. There are so many things that you can do to change these patterns. Are they hard? Absolutely. If they were easy, you would have changed them a long time ago. Does it take a lot of bravery? 100%. Does it take, a really willingness to realize I don't want to live this way anymore? But there are so many things you can do. It's a slow and steady journey. We are here with you.
Well, for the sake of raising awareness, please share this episode with any type Cs in your life or people who know and love a type C or are managing a type C at work or anything like that. I think it'll be really helpful. And thank you both so much. I've learned so much today. It's really helped me just kind of bring all these ideas together. And so really appreciate your time and the work that you're doing in this space.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's been a pleasure to be here.
And if people are looking for little snippets of us, we do post as much as we can on Instagram at the Type C Personality. And we have some great episodes of our podcast also on YouTube. We do also do workshops and webinars trying to teach as many people as we can about these type C traits and what they can do. But I'm so excited that we were able to have this talk today. Thank you for making the time for us, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you both. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for listening to the conversation about type C and the type C personality profile. And I am here with Jill to have a little discussion about today's conversation. So Jill, take it away. What do you think?
Well, all right. First, I'm going to admit, hi, my name is Jill, and I am a recovering type C. And
Hi,
I
Jill.
admit I'm also a tiny bit type A as well, which my husband would confirm.
A tinge of
much to
type
his
A.
chagrin. Yeah. But I loved this conversation. I thought it was really, really interesting. And of course, as so many things when we have these episodes, I was thinking about the relationship to ACT and psychological flexibility and values. And so in thinking about type C, what really occurred to me is that this is really about choice. And so it's not that having a type C personality is all bad, being agreeable, being kind, being helpful, those things are assets. And in fact, I think I have a lot of clients who would say those are their values: to be helpful, to be agreeable, to be kind, to be thoughtful. And so, for me, I went to therapy to kind of shed some of that type C, but I don't think that this is about totally shedding the type C personality type. It's about making conscious, deliberate choices so that if you are saying yes to something, you're doing it because it's values aligned, not because you're just on autopilot feeling like you always have to say yes. And when it's not values aligned, that you're learning those skills to set limits and have boundaries and not just doing it on autopilot. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and something that reminds me of is how we can have these traits that I think most people would consider to be positive and these sort of identities. I'm a nice person. I'm kind. That's an example, right? It feels good for most people to kind of identify themselves that way and to think of themselves as nice, kind people. And yet, even a very positive self-story like that, a very desirable and values-aligned one, if we are inflexible about it, it can be a problem for us, or if we over-identify with it. So if I say, I am a nice, kind person, and that becomes, the hallmark of my identity, I can get into pathological altruism, it's called. I wrote about this in my burnout book, right? Where we need to be doing nice things to people to feel okay about ourselves. It's really more of an ego thing. Or if we need to sometimes be honest or set a boundary or something like that, it feels really, really uncomfortable. And so, if we can hold these identities and these self-related narratives a little bit more lightly, that really does give us more flexibility to handle each situation as it arises. I'm nice and kind, and there's a time and a place for me standing up for myself.
Right. Values are context dependent. Even though values tend to be fairly stable and don't really change over time, the ones you choose to prioritize vary depending on context. So if you have a boss or a partner who's being abusive and treating you terribly, then that is not a context in which prioritizing kindness and agreeableness is like necessarily what's called for. That might be a context where you want to be more assertive and come forward with more self-respect and that kind of thing. And so really having that flexibility around the context, I think is what you're speaking to there.
Yeah, and that's why I love some of the examples that they gave in this conversation, because you can see the consequence when you go too far with this. I mean, the Anna's story of being in the, being on maternity leave and working the whole time is just such a painful example of that. It's
totally
so extreme, but it's, it does kind of illustrate something.
Yeah. And it makes sense in a lot of ways too, that human beings need each other. We need connection. And ultimately, there's this fear of disconnection that if I let you down, if I disappoint you, if I say no, set a limit, that you're going to be mad at me and it's going to destroy our relationship. But, if you test that out, if you rely on those predictions, you're going to keep people pleasing. But if you test that out, your experience is generally going to show you that that really isn't true. And if it is true, then that person's probably not your people anyway.
Right.
Right.
Well, and how close can you possibly be to someone if you can't, have a little conflict or be honest or handle some disagreement or confrontation?
Yeah.
So
100%.
Sometimes for the sake of having that closer relationship that you really care about, you do have to, not type C. You have
stop pleasing.
Right. Stop pleasing. Exactly. All right. Well, for all you type Cs and those who love them out there, we thank you for listening, and we really hope you enjoyed today's conversation.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.